simplest thing is thinking about how we treat patients, because they're fundamentally coming into our sphere of life because they are suffering and they're losing control of some aspect of themselves and they're in distress. And so you start off by wanting to alleviate that. The NHS always have a pretty interesting challenge, which is that demand's always going to outstrip supply. The nature of need, an unmet need in society, whether it's thinking about mental health services or even physical health, is actually that it's greater than the resources that have been committed to the NHS. There's always going to be this gap. And that gap is made up through the goodwill of the staff. We're introducing through this gap some degree of suffering we've got to cope with. And I think for me, the challenge therefore is to help staff not protect themselves, because when faced with suffering, we can either deal with it or we can run from it. And these things happen because staff, in my view, are retreating from the suffering. And how do we do that practically? Well, we have the computers that sort of draw us, and so we can spend more time than we need sitting in front of computers. We can spend more time hiding away in offices. There's always something that can take us away from what is actually needed, which is face-to-face time with patients. Staff will retreat from suffering if they haven't got a framework around them that challenges that and confronts it. And so the thing that will protect both from staff burnout and from low morale and from low effectiveness in dealing with patients would be getting together and creating space and time during the day to objectively challenge one another about protective behaviours, fleeing from suffering, not facing up to patient suffering. It can be a small amount of time. I mean, even a 5 or 10 minute conversation can be actually quite mind-changing during the day.
I think everybody's stretched in the NHS, and I think that brings about behaviours that people in normal circumstances wouldn't behave that way. And they're not always aware of the impact of those behaviours on the staff that they work with. How do we both balance delivering what we need to deliver, but in a way that keeps our staff with us, where they still feel motivated, even at times when it might be difficult.
From our perspective, we need to think about how we can use our resources to best effect and maximise the expertise of the people that work in our teams and right across the trust, to think about how we give the best possible sort of quality service, experience and outcome for the people that we serve. We need to think about how we can deliver on the kind of austerity agenda, if you like, and how we can take decisions to maximise value for money. And what we've decided to do is to think about productivity and to think about how we can get more, if you like, activity for the resource that we have.
The NHS is based on providing a service, absolutely, but actually caring for people as well. It's a person that you are helping, healing, conducting an operation on, not a piece of metal. And I think that that's where there needs to be some work to look at it. Similarly with staff, they're not a machine. So there will be good days, there will be bad days. You'll get 150% a lot of the time, but you might get 75 another part of the time. And we just need to look and recognise that. Another perhaps barrier in the NHS is that we're quite hierarchical, so we don't always respect protected time.
I suppose my challenge to any organisation delivering care is, how do we capture those testimonials? You see, at the moment in the organisation I work in, you have on our e-bulletin, you get these little, a service user wants to thank John Smith for being very nice. And we all enjoy reading that, but are we quantifying that? Is there a way of saying, have you noticed that team seems to get a lot more of that? Can we measure that? Can we then say, this team has got something to offer everybody else? even if maybe they're not as efficient in other ways as everybody else. So that we need to find a way of quantifying the quality.
Credit to the organisation that we have invested very heavily in quality improvement systems in the organisation, and that really means that we question really the quality of the service before we do the cost.
So the biggest challenge for the NHS is how we keep on delivering this huge vision that's free at the point of delivery, with as much courage as that we have ever done. How do we do that, continuing to stay doing that with care, because that's part of who we are. Deliver that with care and yet keep up with efficiencies, keep up with technical innovations. It's a huge challenge. How do we do that? And that's what we're going to explore now. So I want to tell you about why I think the NHS is the greatest act of cultural compassion ever. This, my family have kept. It was sent out, I think, to all homes explaining what you were going to get with the new National Insurance Scheme. And if you read it, it's extraordinary. It shows absolute clarity of vision and very comprehensive. So it's very clear what you're going to get, and you get practically everything. It also this setting up this National Health Service at that particular time took huge courage. We were nearly bankrupt as a country, and yet we still did it. And we did it because we knew that having a healthy population was in the country's interests. The National Health Service built into its core constitution the values of compassion. It's not an added extra. It's not just about the technical aspects of care. It's actually about the values in which the NHS are predicated. And because of those things, the NHS has huge cultural ownership. We don't just use it, but a lot of us work in it, and it touches practically everybody's lives at some point. So for me personally, the NHS helped my mum to die with dignity. It helped me give birth to a child, and both of us came out of it alive. And also it helped my niece recover from a brain tumour when she was very young. So for me, it's been really important personally, but also professionally now because I work in it. And although we don't hear a lot about this, it's really, if you look at all of the figures, how we compare to other organisations across the world, we are most of the time very effective and efficient. Very effective and efficient. And we don't hear a lot about that. We hear a lot of the challenges and the sad stories and the problems. We don't hear often about how good it is. And I, for one, am really proud to work in it. As a result of that, I think when we're thinking about culture and compassion, we can take those values and learn something from it. What is your vision? Do you have the courage to do it? Is it done effectively? And what are the values on which it's based? But also, most importantly, the aspect of cultural ownership. What are you doing to engage the people who you work with, who are going to work for you, and who are going to use the service that you have? How can you engage them in such a way that they also feel that degree of ownership and passion for the same organisation that you have?
Something I noticed recently from a colleague, and it was around, I suppose, self-compassion, self-compassionate management. And what she said was, I organise my day and I don't have my emails on all the time. And I thought, oh, I always have my emails on all the time. And actually that isn't necessarily an efficient way to work, because at the beginning of your day, you will have priorities. But because you have your inbox open all the time, there keeps on being new things coming in and distractions. And what she said is, if anything comes in that really has to rearrange the priorities, they'll ring me, and people know to do that. And that really resounded with me. I don't know how it would work in practice, because she's quite a senior member of staff. And I think that that's another thing, another perhaps barrier in the NHS, is that we're quite hierarchical. So we don't always respect protected time. You know, I know myself, you get the answer phone saying, this office is open between 9 and 2 a.m. What happens if I have an emergency at 4? I know people are sitting in the office, but they won't answer the phone. So I think we have to be smart about it, and we have to think about the impact that those rules have on other people. But I think that it was a really good way to start, and having time, safe time to reflect and concentrate on what you need to do is really important. And I think that we don't have enough reflection time, and we don't value it enough. We're pushing to meet targets. We've got to see X amount of patients in a day. And actually, sometimes spending an extra 5 minutes might push the targets out the window, but may save 2 hours in the long term because that was what you needed at that time.
An illustration. I have a son who has Down syndrome. I understand that when he comes into our services and meets somebody, they need to be efficient. I want them to help with his educational plan, the social work team. I want that to happen. That's really important to me. He used to have a blood. He's got an underactive thyroid gland, so his bloods are taken regularly. When he was little, there was one phlebotomist. She spent time with him, she talked to him. She was good at finding veins, efficient, but also she was good at calming him down so that when it was time to put the needle into his hand, he's about 7, she could do it. I would ring up and say, can I see that woman? Here's the question, was that ever measured? Did anyone ever say, Karen, and I can still remember her name, is really good? Did anyone ever do that? I bet they didn't. And you know what? I wonder if they said, you spent a bit too long with him, you know, we had 3 other people waiting. That's an efficiency level we have to get to. There is an efficiency in genuine compassionate care. I guess I would challenge any leaders to find out where care is happening. Which are the teams which seem to show most care? Wouldn't it be great if we reached a point where you would say, you need to go to that clinic. They are so lovely. I didn't wait long either. You know, part of compassion is not spending ages in a waiting area. So there is efficiency. Compassion does include efficiency, but we've got to find a way. And I want to challenge myself in this, along with others. Let's find out where care happens. Let's quantify it. Let's reward it. And let's spread it.
Our role is sometimes just to get into a dialogue, into conversations that help people to understand what's going on, what impact is it having on people, are there any issues for patients, any safety issues, have we really properly explored them and done everything we can to make sure that patients are kept as safe as possible. But also, I think, to understand the impact on staff and to bring about interventions that are supportive for staff, help them to think, give them some time to reflect, so that, again, they can engage with the reasons why they're doing their job. Being able to articulate the vision of what's best for patients is a really important part of leadership, I think, in the NHS, as well as understanding when things do go wrong. It's about understanding the position that individual was in and why they made the decisions that they made, and rather than jumping in with and being critical about it, it's helping people to, if they had made a mistake, it's helping them to learn from those mistakes so that you know, they still feel motivated and not criticised and put down. So I think in a very pressurised system, I think that's a real challenge for leaders.
As an organisation, just about a year ago, we launched a programme called the Purposeful and Productive Community Services Programme. And the objective of that really was to use a lot of our experience and learning that we've had with quality improvement to think about how, at a large scale across our organisation, we can work with all of our community teams across the specialties to think about how we can get a stronger sense of focus really on the real added value, if you like, input that we can have with working with people, take away some of our wasteful processes, so that actually what we leave then is clinical time that we can actually spend to make a difference to people's recovery. That really is the essence of what we're trying to do. Credit to the organisation that we have invested very heavily in quality improvement systems in the organisation, and that really means that we question really the quality of the service before we do the cost. We have an emphasis on how meaningful the interventions and the interactions that we have with people are, so that we can try and maximise the skills that our very dedicated and skilled staff have to offer to people. So a lot of team processes, a lot of work around visual control, how we manage our caseloads, how we review our clinical processes, how people work together within teams, and actually how we can make a better connection really with what we do on a day-to-day basis with the performance of the team overall. And recognising that from where we are today to where we need to be in the future, there's a lot of personal change and organisational change that needs to happen. And to support that, we've invested in lots of coaching support as well.
One of the biggest challenges is how staff feel they have the time to hold in mind their aims and objectives with care. So time and space is coming up repeatedly as one of the main barriers to people not just caring but continuing to be effective in their goals, towards their goals. One of the things that we've learned is modelling from our most senior leaders. If we see that our most senior leaders are reflective about their own ways of relating to staff, about the impact of their decisions on the well-being of the people who work in the organisation, then that helps other people to do it. It's also important to have something in policies. So the way that we write our policies, the kind of language and words that we use are important. And if you really want to embed compassion in an organisation, then you need to embed it into its narrative, into the way that it talks about itself, into the way that it expects the routine business to be carried out. It's not an added extra.
The thing that will protect both from staff burnout and from low morale and from low effectiveness in dealing with patients would be getting together and creating space and time during the day to objectively challenge one another about protective behaviours, fleeing from suffering, not facing up to patient suffering. In my view, that unless you're intentionally spending time talking about our own suffering, patient suffering, and our tendency to self-protect, we're not going to be effectively reflecting on this. And so it can be a small amount of time. I mean, even a 5 or 10 minute conversation can be actually quite mind-changing during the day.